other opposites, he also realised that everything comes in opposites. And Heraclitus was interested in this, what we'd call polarity, which he discerned in nature. I mean, obviously day and night are opposites, male and female, up and down, and he saw this as a good thing, the polarities underlying everything, because they turn the engines of history, they turn the engines of time, and conflict seems to be part of this. People have conflict. I mean, there are many conflicts raging on the planet. There's one fundamental one, which is that there's a group of people, a bunch of nations, saying we should have a democratic structure and make decisions, not be oppressive, not overburden people with authoritarian regimes. And there's another bunch of people saying, no, let's just do things the way that the leaders say. Let's leave decision-making up to a chosen few. And if people don't like that, well, we'll put them in prison or have them killed off. So it's a sort of totalitarian thing. Now, this was going on even in ancient Greece, because the Athenians chose democracy. The Spartans chose autocracy. They had a monarchy that was a very fiercely controlled military police state, which depended on spying. The Cryptia was the spying regime of Sparta. And they were worse than, they were as bad as the FSB and, the Russian Secret Service. They would haul you off and have you strung up on a tree if you spoke out against the Spartan regime. It was that fierce. Well, the Athenians said, no, we don't want that. We want culture, democracy, freedom, liberty. And that was the deep roots of the liberal revolution, which was, Gladstone was a classical scholar. He was a friend of Schliemann, who discovered Troy, and Mycenae. And when Schliemann came to London, Gladstone chaired a lecture that Schliemann gave at the Athenaeum, which is the sort of great intellectual centre in London society back in the Victorian times. Yes, so as a scholar, Gladstone and modern, philosophers since then have looked at Heraclitus's work with awe. He's a great thinker. Even Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh did a commentary on Heraclitus's fragments, because he sees in there a sort of tantric teachings, which is all about polarities, opposites, Shiva and Shakti. And Heraclitus said that the arche, which is the core of reality, the source of everything, the arche is fire, and that in turn is the logos. So the divine mind. Now, this is what sometimes is now called panpsychism. There's a philosophical move afoot, and there's a professor of philosophy up at Durham University arguing for panpsychism. Everything comes from divine mind, divine consciousness. This little beetle here, the flowers, the light, the candle, the flame, is all somehow powered by consciousness at a level we don't understand yet. But that should bring us humility, because we are in the middle of the divine mind, which chooses to manifest as humans and so on and so on, and everything that is. Is it inevitable? So I think conflict is part of that dynamic polarity. What I'm against is violence, as in when you take the conflict too far. When I was a child, I used to play, games in the streets of Kemp Town growing up with my friends. We'd dress up as knights in armour. I was El Cid or Robin Hood or whatever, and we'd play in the park, and we'd have little wooden swords, and it was all fun, and if somebody shot you with the wooden stick, you had to lie down and die, and you got me, fair enough. That was the rule of the game. But then you got up and carried on playing. Well, what I'm against, and that's fine, it's part of life, right? And mostly, doing El Cid, you were trying to get the beautiful lady, or whatever, win the consort. But where I think it's taken too far is when people massacre and do genocide and do slaughter and kill people unnecessarily. If you're trying to prove you're macho, then play fairly, play honestly, but not mass murder. And I think Heraclitus would agree with me on that. life is a dialectic. I mean, the quote you're saying, life is a combat, I think what he was saying is life is a dialectical process of opposites, which sometimes clash and are in conflict. But then out of that emerges life, I mean, in the middle of I've been talking, cells are dying in my body, and yet others are being born. We're in the middle of life and death. I think what peace is finding the still centre at the hub of the vortex. So whilst everything is going around, conflict and stuff, we have to find that inner peace, which I think is the Logos. And that was later adopted by Christian theology to be the aspect of the divine that incarnated in the person of Rabbi Yeshua. Inside Rabbi Yeshua, this Logos principle was activated, which is potentially in all of us, but we just don't, realise it. And that's the enlightenment bit that we're capable of.
Yes, but his assassination was part of the game. Jesus, he was crucified.
Well, yeah. Well, that's another discussion we can come to. But good point. Out of that conflict came Christianity, and the promise of some sort of higher resolution to that violence, that it meant something somewhere. But also the resurrection of Christ represented the transcendence above the violence. And if you haven't watched The Chosen, which is a film version of the gospel stories, they've invented a new symbol instead of the cross, which is the killing, the open cave with the stone rolled away. They've got a new symbol for the new story of the resurrection. And I think, just to fast forward, I mean, Heraclitus is one of the founders of logic in philosophy. And I think Hegel in Germany took Heraclitus's ideas and transformed them into Hegelian philosophy. What he called the dialectic is this constant quest for the resolution of opposites into a higher synthesis, a higher harmony. And I think that, in Hegel's lectures, he always honoured Heraclitus as one of the great thinkers that he was minded to follow. So I think that the Trinity, which is a sort of cumbersome theological tool, is actually quite sophisticated if you look at it. And I think the universe works in threes. As Hegel said, you have the thesis, you have the antithesis, and you have the synthesis. And what we're trying to do at the moment on the planet is find the synthesis of these oppositions in a higher harmony, which can bring peace.
Yeah, you are speaking to a French guy, so we drink with the milk, the thèse, antithèse, synthèse.
You like, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
you're
from
all...
a young age, we are educated to that.
Yes, and you had a great scholar, Kojev, a Russian guy, come and teach classes on Hegel in Paris, which half of the intellectuals of France all went and studied. So you certainly know your Hegel. Okay, I'm going to shift now to the second box, which was Shiva, which was quite interesting and fortuitous, because Shiva also is represented as someone that is not unfamiliar with combat. Shiva is a god who works with, life's cycles of death and destruction. His consort Kali, in whose yuga we're living now, is very much, a warrior, a battling warrior. And no doubt many of the RSS followers that I mentioned earlier, they have little shrines to Shiva in their home. They believe that they're doing Shiva's will by attacking Muslims and, attacking Christians and all these other namby-pamby people, when really we should all be good Shiva followers and Hindus. I've been a devotee of Shiva myself in my own way for many years. I've been to Hindu temples in India. I have a bouquet given to me in the inner sanctum at one of the great Shiva temples, Tiruvannamalai, where Sri Ramana Maharshi lived, one of the great sages of modern India. And I always try and observe the Shivaratri, which is the great festival when Shiva is celebrated all night. You stay up all night and do devotions and songs, and you burn candles and things and incense. It's Shiva's the god technically of destruction, but really he's the god of transformation, because what life doesn't like is when structures get too fixed, too stuck, and then life goes out of them. Life is movement, life is process. That was the point of Heraclitus. Life is a flow. You can't step into the same river twice. So Shiva would totally agree, and I can see Heraclitus and Shiva having great chats, because that was Shiva's point, that you can't sort of stay fixed. I mean, this body's temporary. I won't be around for long, but I'm going to enjoy it whilst I've got it, you know, and then I'll go on and do other things. And in my outer body, I'll cause trouble, you know, elsewhere. By trouble, I mean good trouble of lysis. And so Shiva's the playful deity who can embrace death and transcend it, just as Christ did. And he's the one that drinks the poison, and his neck turns blue, but he then can transmute the poison. So the Shaivite devotees, they're allowed by Indian law to smoke their ganja and drink their their cannabis lassis or whatever. By law, they're allowed, because they've renounced the play of normality, the play of conventional social advantage and advancement and money and wealth and status games, which all come from ego. They become renunciates. They grow their hair long, and they discovered that the sacred holy ganja gives them an insight into what goes on behind the scenes of the matrix, which is the divine play of consciousness, which is what the Rastas say. So I think in that respect, Shiva is the Lord of revelation, and he takes forms at different times. Some people say Sai Baba was a manifestation of Shiva. I met Sai Baba, I went to Puttaparthi and met him. I mean, yes, he was an incarnation of Shiva, but then so are you and so am I. We all are. We are all the play of that divine mind in the process of self-revealing and self-concealing. But I don't think Shiva wants us to get hung up on any one particular box. And he'd be very embarrassed if we all became devotees of Shiva, because the point is the universalness of the consciousness, which is appearing in all the boxes. And yes, it's all Shiva having fun, but don't tell anyone, that's secret. And so I think, there's a great similarity between these two, actually, between Heraclitus and the pre-Socratics and the Shaiva devotees. There is actually a very interesting tradition, which is, if I can just quickly share, let me see if I can find this. In one of the devotees of Shiva that is known, who was a great yoga, and by the way, Shiva is the god of yoga, which means the sort of transcendental breaking down of the barriers between self and God, or ego, dissolving the ego into the divine mind. There was in ancient times, there was a particular sage. Let me see if I can find the right part of the text here to share, because I want to quote it exactly. Now, oh dear. Whenever you want one, it does. There it is, 420. Fine. Okay. So this is quite interesting that this saint of Shiva, there are many temples that he set up, and he's always shown holding a club and stark naked with a phallus that's quite large, which is a interesting thing for a god to be doing. And this particular deity, well, he was taken as a manifestation of Shiva by the Shaivites, but he seems to have been an actual historical figure. And he was around, it's thought, sort of just a bit before Christ. His name is Lakulisha, meaning the Lord with a club. Some say he lived around 25 to 100 AD, was a historical teacher, and now what's interesting is that in England, at Cerne Abbas in Dorset, there's an engraving on a hillside where chalk has been revealed of exactly that same figure, which is identical to the images of Lakulisha in the temples of India. And I speculate, and I'm not the first to have argued this, other scholars have said, wouldn't it be weird if some Shaiva devotees, way back around the time of Christ, had gone on like a pilgrimage, got to Britain, got friendly with some Druids and said, do you mind if we sketch out our Lord on your hillside? Because it is him, it is this Shaiva figure. Maheshvara, he's also called. And the Linga Purana actually predicted in chapter 24 that Shiva, in the form of Maheshvara, would appear in the form of a wandering monk called Lakulin. And so there he is on a hillside in Dorset. And if you don't believe me, go to Dorset, and you can stand there. And I think it's still going on. Women, if they want to get pregnant, they go and sit, and on the appropriate part of this great sculpture. Well, it's it's an image at Cerne Abbas. So yes, and so Shiva also takes delight in sexuality. Paradoxically, as well as transcending sexuality, he's for embracing it to the point where you don't need it anymore, because you've experienced that polarity of male-female. You've explored that to its maximum, and then you realise that actually everything is making love all the time. And we've all got male-female polarities within us, in every cell. I learned this week that some scientists have photographed the moment at which a female egg is fertilised by a male sperm. They've got some micro cameras have gone in and watched this. And apparently, the female egg emits 10 billion sparks of zinc, like a sort of electric cloud of lightning flares. That's Heraclitus' logos, having fun at that moment of conception. Well, that's Shiva having fun too, isn't it? Shiva and Shakti. So this, the Lord is the Lord. Let's honour the Lord in all the forms that the Lord takes, whether you call it the Logos or the Christ or Shiva or Shakti. It's the same thing, or Allah. And what saddens me about some Hindus' failure to realise the importance of Islam and Allah is that Allah is obviously Shiva as well, hiding in his own transcendental beauty. And Muhammad was, a devotee, surrendered to the Absolute as well. Which is why the Indian Muslims became so very, I think, wise and intellectual, and brought mathematics from India to Baghdad and then on to the West, So, and I've just discovered an amazing Muslim Indo-Persian medical expert living in the 17th century who translated all the Indian medical texts into Arabic and vice versa. And he lived in Hyderabad in the south of India, where I've been. There was a highly intellectual Islamic community in Hyderabad. These people are amazing, and we should honour each other's wisdom, I think. Okay, so let's the Lord of Paradox is another name for Shiva. Well, so is the god of Heraclitus. Okay, talking of gods, I think we should move on to the tarot of the gods and see what which deity wants to turn up today. I mean, I know they're all the same one, but they've got different names and forms, because just as we have different bodies, we have our own histories and trajectories, and those are important. So here, choose a deity. and we'll see what light it can shed on life.
Right.
Oh, right. Okay, that's a nice one. We haven't had him for a while. Excellento. Right. Okay. Okay, well these are very interesting. So the first one we have is the Knight of Earth. So the Tarot of the Gods is divided into the 4 elements. The major arcana, 22 cards, and then the suits of earth, air, water and fire. And this is the suit of earth, and he's the Knight of Earth. And he is a Finnish god called Ilmarinen from Finland. And I have a lot of time for Ilmarinen. He's from the Kalevala, which is the great Finnish epic, which was taken down from oral teachings of bards in Finland in the 19th century. And it's a great poem by a chap called Lönnrot in the 19th century. This god, Ilmarinen, is kind of the eternal hammerer and the blacksmith and the inventor of the gods in the Kalevala. One of the most important of all the Finnish gods. He's the artificer who makes stuff. So in this modern rendition by my artist from Syria, he's making a laptop, he's fixing a broken computer, he's crafting internet stuff. And that's what the Finnish people do. They invent Nokia phones. They're very, very clever, and that's all Ilmarinen's magic that they're doing. Artificing ways that we can all be in touch with each other. So in some ways he's similar to the god Ptah in Egypt, who's also a creator god, who creates stuff. Ilma means air in Finnish, and he works transforming the fruits of the earth into useful things like computers and all. He makes, the most important thing he makes is the Sampo, which is at the heart of the Kalevala myth or legend or story, which is a kind of magical machine that he's created, which nobody quite knows what it is. You can put all kinds of things into it, like salt or honey or milk, and out comes gold or whatever you want. And nobody quite knows how it works. And a lot of the poem is about finding it because it gets lost and it falls off a ship and you have to go under the sea to find it. And the Sampo took the shape of a magic mill that produces anything you want, but its details are kept secret to this day. And the story of the Kalevala is all about, what happens to the Sampo. And what's interesting is that in modern Finland, they've revived this, and the Finnish internet official bodies have created at the University of Helsinki a Helsinki Centre for Digital Humanities, which they've created a thing called the Culture Sampo, using the term because they're arguing the Sampos are really the computer systems that you can put into them whatever you want, now it comes anything you want. And with 3D printing, we've kind of recreated the Sampo. So the Finnish cultural Sampo has tens of thousands of different texts on it. And there's also a book Sampo, which has every single book ever published in Finnish on this book Sampo. There's a travel Sampo, which covers everything, where you want to travel and so on. And there's a biography Sampo, which has thousands of scholars, 13,000 Finnish biographies of famous Finnish people. There's a name Sampo. Every name ever used in Finland for people or places is logged with its etymology. And there's a law Sampo, so every law ever passed by the Finnish governments is listed. So I think Ilmarinen represents human creativity at its best. He's the god inspiring digital technology, the latest internet stuff, for the right use. I think what Ilmarinen, and this is why he's got this beautiful rainbow bride. He was a great lover of women, and he won and wooed this particular goddess, and she's represented by the rainbow. And the rainbow represents the peace that is poise between opposites, because the rainbow carries within it oppositional colours, like the periodic table does. We've got all the colours of the rainbow, but they're held in balance. And that's what the rainbow stands for, is the kind of peace that comes out of creativity and ecstasy and love, ultimately, because that's our word for this dialectical opposition that resolves itself as love. And so, yeah, so, and the Finnish people are amazing, have great respect for them, artists and, you know, wonderful people. They've just joined NATO because they were feeling very oppressed by Putin's Russia flexing its sort of fascistic might, and they were conquered and under Russia's control for a long time. So they don't want that again. They want to be part of Europe, and they're part of the European Union. And I honour their, you know, their desire to have protection. I would like NATO to be not necessary in the world. I'd like a peace treaty between Putin and NATO. I'd like them all to like calm down and remove their vast stockpiles of weapons, like in the days of Thatcher and Reagan and Gorbachev, when we got a nuclear disarmament going. I'd like Putin to take a different pill. He needs new potions that restores his right mind. And he should realise Gorbachev was the wisest Russian in the last 100 years, not Stalin. He's been following the Stalin creed by mistake. He needs to, like, I wish Ilmarinen would go and tinker with Putin a bit and give him a new potion and get him to drink the peace potion and realise Gorbachev had the soul of Russia at his heart. This weekend the Russian people have voted. Well, you know, it's not a fair election. That was my point at the beginning. It's a twisted election when opposition people haven't been allowed to stand. So yeah, we need Ilmarinen to come and fix all the problems of the world by human creativity. So thank you. And then we have the Major Arcana, card 21, which in the normal tarot is called the World. And in my reinterpretation of the tarot of the gods, it's the god known as the Great Architect. And the Great Architect is conceived in various ways. You have various Freemasonic symbols here, because God is called the Great Architect by Freemasons. You can join the Freemasons, whatever your religion, whichever box you're in. But in the Anglo-American British Masonic tradition, you have to believe in some kind of creative intelligence behind the universe, which they call the Great Architect. You can use any name you want, it doesn't matter, but they argue that the universe shows signs of having been designed. It's not random. The stars and the planets, they stick to their orbits. There's some kind of laws governing reality. Newton was a Freemason because he was convinced that there is this ordering intelligence behind it, which he tried to work out in his Principia Mathematica. But in the end of that great work on mathematics, he said, I can't explain how or why gravity happens. I can explain the mathematical rules governing it, but I can't explain how and why it works. I suspect it's got something to do with God, he said. But then he said, I'm going to leave that for another book. And that's the very end of Principia Mathematica. So I came along, when I discovered that and read that, being I was quite a fast bowler when I used to play cricket, so I like to charge stuff. So I thought, well, I'll write the sequel to Principia Mathematica. So I wrote the Philosophiae Religionis Principia Mathematica, which is the philosophical principles of religious mathematics. So I took that last line of Newton's work he's pointing to the great architect and saying there's got to be something out there that's made all this work like this. So then I did, in my 3 volumes, soon to be 4, explored what that might be. You know, what is the religious mathematics of the divine architect? Called Govannon by the Druids. Govan in Glasgow, near where I used to live, is named after him. Vishvakarman, the god of the architects of Hindu religion. Daedalus in ancient Greece, who made the labyrinth, and the wings for his son Icarus, was the god of architects, if you want, for the Greeks. And Plato talks about the demiurge, who's like a divine being that creates the world through divine intelligence. That's the same as the divine architect. And the same in the Hermetic tradition. Amun, the hidden god, with Ptah, brings everything into existence. And of course in Freemasonry they honour all the gods, and they use the temple, rebuilding Solomon's temple, as a kind of motif of what we should be doing on this planet. Building, not destroying. And the divine architect needs a divine partner who's called the Shekinah, the goddess, in all the different traditions. And Solomon, who built the temple, the first one, with help from Phoenician architects, Hiram, knew this well, which is why he, had such a wonderful love for the female of the species. And in the Solomonic writings, the divine Shekinah is the one that dances when creation's happening. When God is doing all the creating, the Shekinah is actually there helping and making it all happen. So, and the whole biblical text is about that polarity between God and the goddess, which is what the Kabbalah is about. And Christ talks about this as well. One of my favourite Anglican thinkers, Sir Henry Wotton, who ended up as headmaster at Eton College in England, he wrote a book where he translated The Elements of Architecture by Vitruvius, who was the scholarly architect of ancient Rome. He translated it into English in 1624. And Wotton was Britain's ambassador in Venice and a very learned man. Wotton writes that well building hath 3 conditions: firmness, commodity, and delight. Yeah, that's Jacobean English. I love it. Sir Henry Wotton was close friends with John Donne, the poet, who used to be friends with the Magdalen Herbert of Montgomery, where I used to live in Wales, which is a delightful Georgian town.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
I do not understand the word delight.
Okay, delight. Joie de vivre, jouissance, on dit en français, je pense.
Merci.
Oui. So, I'm going to finish with a poem by one of Wotton's friends, who was from this Anglican metaphysical tradition. It's called The Church Floor by George Herbert, who was the brother of Lord Edward Herbert, who was the philosopher at Montgomery, who was the first deist in English philosophical tradition. He served as ambassador in Paris, here in France, for a while. Edward Herbert, one of my heroes. And his brother became a poet, George Herbert, and a priest, normal, little priest, but was a master poet. And this is his poem called The Church Floor, in his collection called The Temple, on God.